G'day, I'm Tim, the two-wheeled Somm, and today I'm on two wheels in northeastern Victoria, exploring the beautiful wine region of Beechworth, centred on the historic town of the same name. I'm heading just out of the main town to Stanley, where I'm going to spend the day with Tessa and Jeremy Schmölzer, who together make Vigneron Schmölzer and Brown. I'm looking forward to learning a bit about their high-altitude site, the climate and history of Beechworth, and why Nebbiolo has such a bright future here. Stick around and learn about this highly underrated Australian wine region on Two Wheeled Somm.
So this is our building project that we've been working on for a number of years now, and it's getting very, very close to completion on. It's our first winery here, so what you'll see is it's a big shed, but it's also in the Beechworth tradition. We'll live inside the completed building. You'll see a lot of wineries here like Sorenberg, Giekonda, who else? Castagna. They're all kind of in the same building, and it's like a nice thing. But we've also got 2 kids under 7, so it means that we can do things in the winery, do tastings with people, and they're just going to be through the door. So it's not having to go from a lot of locations. So that's a big plus from what we've been doing to date, which is having barrels in one spot and in an apple shed here, and so it's nice to get into something a bit more solid, a little bit more permanent. But also with my architecture hat on, I've planned this, that if we wanted to go backwards into that hill at the same level, you'd go about 40 metres back that way, and you'd be in 5-6 metres underground. And so we've designed it that is the future winery if we do really well, have time, second generation, all that kind of stuff. We might not do it in our lifetime, but it's good to plan. And that soil is just really crumbly old sandstone, so it digs very easily. It's really free draining, so we can have 100 mils of rain and drive on this place, anywhere in a 2-wheel drive the next day.
Is that typical of the soil here?
It's half and half in Beechworth.
Yep.
So there's a line about 100 metres south of the Wangaratta Road. So if you think of some of the big names in Beechworth like Giekonda and Castagna, they're north of the Wangaratta Road, with generally south-facing or sort of southish-facing sites. And you go on to Pete Graham's, the old Nantua vineyard, and he has a split. I think it's in his Nebbiolo, where he basically has some on the granite, some on the old sandstone. So anything that's up the hills in Stanley, up at this altitude, so Giekonda's Red Hill Nebbiolo vineyard, which is Nathan's place, Smith's vineyard, Fighting Gully Road, us, running across the road there. Adrian Rodder's got a tiny little vineyard at his house. That's all on the decomposed, this red decomposed sandstone. So Mark Walpole explained to us recently that it's a rare example of seafloor at this elevation, because the granite essentially lifted it up and it's sort of sat on top, whereas normally it's so weathered that it's always like worn away.
This guy's the first commercial release of Thorley Nebbiolo, so 2021. Yeah, we think Beechworth just has a wonderful potential to possibly be the preeminent Nebbiolo region in Australia. There's quite a lot of excitement coming off a reasonably small base in the region. So, this fruit was picked at about 13.3 Beaumet. It's crushed, destemmed, just wild fermented in flower pots. I think it had 25 or 26, maybe a month. We're not doing crazy long time on skins, just when the cap starts to fall properly, which took just under a month. And basket pressed and then raised in an old puncheon and an old hogshead. It took an entire year to go through Mallow. So Nebbiolo behaves like nothing else. Like you taste the fruit in the vineyard and you're like, this tastes nothing like the wine. And then you get the fruit into the winery and you taste it as you're crushing it and you're thinking this looks nothing like the wine. And then it's fermenting and it smells like, you know, Seville oranges and grapefruit and things like that. And you're like, how is this going to taste like Nebbiolo in 18 months' time? And then you press it off and it's acids up here, of which about half is malic. And then it sits in oak doing nothing for 12 months. You know, we check the malic every month when we top it. And it didn't start malo and it didn't start malo. Or it was like trickling, like moving a tiny bit so that you weren't, you know, terrified, but really not doing very much. And I remember texting with Brian Martin. I'm like, Brian, do your Nebbiolos take like 1,000 years to go through? And he's like, ignore them, just ignore them. So the two vintages that we've made of Nebbiolo, Malo has gone through in the following vintage. And then at the end of the following vintage, we've racked and returned and sulfured the wine. And then 6 weeks later, oh, you're Nebbiolo. Oh, you actually taste like Nebbiolo. Okay, I can see the kind of bruised rose petal. I can see, you know, those kind of warm red fruits. I can see that kind of little bit of New Chesterfieldy leather and things like that. And yeah, this was 18 months in oak before bottling. So and obviously unfined and unfiltered. So just a couple of rackings to get it ready for bottling. And I think that's got wonderful varietal expression, correct tannin profile, good bright acidity and good aromatics as well. So I'm super excited for the variety.
So we're at about 830 metres. The top of that hill in there is about 840. Because we have no hills above us, we generally don't get much frost because cold air drains downhill. So what happens is if you're at this height and you've got a big hill above you, you'll actually get a lot of cold air coming onto it. Because we're here, the warm air just collects. So if you'll see it in winter, when it's really cold, these are the spots along the top of this hill that the kangaroos sit to stay warm. And it was one of the first things we noticed when we came here is that the kangaroos were always up the top. So vineyards on this property are all at the top of the hill, and we keep the downhill patches clear because they just get a bit too frosty. So, and so far it's been good. This year there is a type of frost that moves uphill and we got it, but it still didn't affect the whole vineyard. But if you come through here, you'll see what's great about Stanley is it's and why we picked it, apart from it hasn't yet been over 30 degrees this summer. So even with this warm weather, it's perfect ripening, but it's not hot. And it's great for, particularly for varieties like Riesling and Nebbiolo, which just don't love a lot of heat. It's a bit of climate change mitigation coming up this high. The other aspect is that it's very high rainfall. But rainfall in a way that we don't have boggy soils, we have good free draining soils, so we don't have to worry about some of the downsides of rainy weather in terms of getting tractors bogged and things. We do have to worry about disease like everyone does if you get rain in the season. And when you look out here, so this is the rest of the plateau. There's a lot of nut orchards. So these are chestnuts, there's walnuts down further. There are cherries, apples, berries, and it's just this plateau and it's protected. It's a protected horticultural area for this kind of level of production. And so grapes are not the common thing here, but there are a few, ours is the biggest planting and there are a few other small plots around. We actually take all the fruit from every vineyard in Stanley. So we have the Brunnan vineyard across the road, which we've been working with since we got here. One of our neighbours has a very tiny plot of Pinot Noir, and then there's one in town which is recently sold to a couple from Sydney, and so far we've been taking their Riesling and Pinot Noir from there as well and helping them manage it a little bit as well. The mountains you see in the distance are covered in snow in winter, so you're looking from Mount Feathertop across to Mount Hotham in that last ridge. So it's a very nice the distance sort of partially in the clouds. Those very last peaks is Feathertop of Mount Hotham, and so on a clear day in winter, the last line is white.
Training grafters. They're growing so well, but you got to nip out their little lateral shoots to focus their growth vertically. So ideally, some of those will do it. Some of these will just get to the wire, but ideally, get nice strong growth off that in the wintertime. To the wintertime, and then we can lay it down like we do the rest of the vines, and then eventually take this old bit off. And protect it so it doesn't get trunk disease or anything like that. But it's the first time I did grafting back in 03 or 04 in Canberra, but that's such a long time ago, and I didn't do post-grafting maintenance, so it's the first time I've actually carried through and seen the vines after they're grafted, and I'm so proud of them. You're doing well, sweetie.
Your babies.
You're doing well.
So there's no phylloxera up here, is there?
No, not that we're aware of. So Mark Walpole reckons that there would have been phylloxera here in the gold rush when there was the original flush of planting, and he's of the belief that it wasn't necessarily phylloxera that buggered the original grape industry, but more likely just the economic boom and bust of the gold rush. And then there was sort of 50 years with no vines in the area between the 20s and the 70s. And the vignerons that have moved in since the 70s and planted vines generally aren't doing a lot of vine or grape or equipment movement between Beechworth and the King and Alpine and valleys and Rutherglen, which of course there's phylloxera all through. So, obviously we're classed as an infested zone, but Mark reckons he hasn't seen any phylloxera up here. I presume it's just a matter of time, and most people are on rootstock anyway, but I have not seen anything to indicate phylloxera. Derek's on own roots, so, we're obviously a bit careful with him, and yeah, just keep on keeping on, I suppose. But equipment and sheep movement are probably the two biggest risks for spreading it, because sheep don't generally go through chlorine baths, and often people graze sheep in their vineyards at winter. So I think that's what's doing a lot of the movement in the Yarra now, is actually stock moving around. I think it's pretty interesting to see where our wines sit as obviously Beechworth wines, but perhaps with a bit more of a kind of upland, kind of alpine feel. It's not quite chalky because of course we're not on chalk, we're on sandstone and slate and things like that, but there's a kind
really
of fine
grippy,
tactile phenolic note that I think is super interesting. And the other Chardonnays on the sediments in Beechworth are Fighting Gully Road, A Rodder. Who else has got Chard on the?
Daniel Balzer would have.
Dan Balzer's on the Mudstone and Shale as well. And if you taste them, I think you can see that minerally thread through all of them. Whereas I think the shape of the granite grown wines are quite different. But that that's deep dive stuff, and for folks who drink a lot of Beechworth wines, who sort of get to know the differences between the two main soil types in the area.
I flushed my kids down in the club.